Reproduction is supposed to be about survival. Pass on your genes, raise the next generation, call it a day. But prehistoric life didn't get that memo. Some ancient creatures turned the whole process into a horror show that makes modern biology look like a bedtime story. We're talking about things that laid eggs out of their backs, animals that gave live birth in the ocean while still looking like reptiles, and one special case that nursed its babies without having nipples. Evolution got creative and sometimes downright unsettling. If you think modern animals are weird, wait until you meet the extinct ones that treated reproduction like a DIY project with no instructions. Just vibes, mucus, and questionable decisions. Long before mammals were awkwardly figuring out how to raise hairless, squealing infants, prehistoric creatures were already knee-deep in experimental parenthood. Reproduction wasn't just about making more of yourself. It was a creative free-for-all, full of trial and error, mostly error. The earliest attempts at making new life happened in the oceans, where creatures like trilobites and ancient fish just blasted their genetic material into the water and hoped for the best. Romantic, right? No parental care, no courtship rituals, just an evolutionary version of spray and pray. But things got weird fast. By the Cambrian period, over 500 million years ago, life had already begun exploring bizarre forms of reproduction. Some animals were brooding eggs on their bodies. Others carried embryos internally. There were worm-like things that split themselves into pieces to reproduce. Essentially, if there was a strange way to make babies, ancient life gave it a shot. Fast forward a few 100 million years, and things got even more complicated. Some fish began laying eggs in very specific places. Others began giving live birth. Amphibians developed weird parental habits like shoving eggs into their backs or even into their stomachs. Reproduction was no longer just functional. It was getting theatrical. And let's not forget that these weren't soft, fuzzy creatures we're talking about. These were armored jawless fish, crab-like predators with knife limbs, and proto-tetrapods crawling onto land with just enough evolutionary know-how to make a mess of things. At the root of all this was one basic evolutionary truth. If a strategy worked, even if it was horrifying, it stayed. Nature doesn't care about decency. If giving birth through your skin helped your species survive another few million years, congratulations, that's your life now. But as odd as that sounds, we haven't even touched the worst offenders yet. Because while the prehistoric world was packed with strange ways to make offspring, some creatures went above and beyond in their efforts to unsettle future paleontologists. You'd think there'd be a limit to how weird evolution would let things get. But no. Turns out the prehistoric rulebook was more of a loose suggestion. Before we crown the undisputed champion of reproductive weirdness, let's take a walk through the prehistoric baby-making Hall of Fame, or possibly the Hall of Shame. Because it turns out that quite a few ancient creatures gave evolution a serious side-eye and said, what if we didn't do it the normal way? First up, Dinocephalosaurus. Picture a sea serpent with the neck of a garden hose, a predator slinking through the Triassic seas of what's now China. You'd expect it to lay eggs like any respectable reptile, right? Nope. Fossil evidence shows it gave live birth. And not just any live birth, the kind where the fetus was found curled up inside, complete with tiny bones. This was a reptile skipping the egg step entirely. Think of a snake giving birth in water, except the snake is 12 feet long and has a neck that could tie itself in knots. Then there's Fuxianhuya, an arthropod from the Cambrian period. Scientists found a fossil where it seemed to be carrying clusters of eggs underneath its head. Not exactly a warm and fuzzy parenting method. More like a prehistoric facehugger creche. Researchers suspect this was an early form of brood care, But to modern eyes, it looks like it lost a bet with biology. Another contender, Myocetus, an early whale ancestor with commitment issues. It lived both on land and in water, and what makes it special is a fossil that shows a fetus inside the mother's body, positioned head first. That might not sound like a big deal until you realize most aquatic mammals give birth tail first to prevent the baby from drowning. This one was still so half-committed to the land that it risked suffocating its newborn just to be old school. Reproductive compromise at its finest. Also, shout out to Waptia fieldensis, another Cambrian oddball. This shrimp-like creature managed to jam over 24 eggs into its carapace. Cozy? Maybe. Efficient? Probably. Visually disturbing? Absolutely. It carried its offspring under its shell like it was smuggling grapes. And it worked. Those eggs were surprisingly well preserved, revealing a lot about early arthropod parenting. Still, you wouldn't want to touch it. And let's not forget about amphibians like Gastrotheca guentheri's ancient ancestors, which likely did something similar to their modern relatives, incubating babies inside their backs. Literally. Pockets of skin where the eggs hatch and metamorphose into froglets before bursting out. That's right. Built-in baby launchers. Not horrifying at all. All of these creatures deserve a slow clap for effort. They took reproductive risks, made it weird, and in some cases got fossils out of the deal. But as bizarre as these strategies are, they still feel like they're following some version of logic. A twisted version, sure, but logic nonetheless. There's one extinct creature, though, that didn't just bend the rules. It ignored them, tore them up, and invented its own user manual. Egg-laying, milk production, no nipples, and enough evolutionary confusion to leave scientists scratching their heads for decades. It's not the biggest, not the scariest, and definitely not the most famous. But when it comes to reproduction, that makes you go, wait, it did what now? This thing takes the cake? Let's talk about a creature that was part mammal, part reptile, and entirely out of its evolutionary mind. Meet Monotrematum sudamericanum, an extinct relative of the modern platypus, which frankly is already weird enough. But Monotrematum? This thing makes the platypus look tame. It lived around 61 million years ago in what is now South America during the Paleocene epoch. Fossil evidence is slim, mostly just a few molar teeth, but those teeth were distinctive enough to slap a name on it and confidently say, "Yup, this was a monotreme." And if you're unfamiliar with what monotremes are, allow me to explain. Gently. Monotremes are mammals that lay eggs. That's not a typo. They hatch their young like reptiles, then feed them with milk like mammals, but without nipples. Instead, they ooze milk from pores in their skin. Imagine a creature that lactates through its chest like a sweaty coffee filter. That's your starting point. Now add in the egg part. Unlike birds, which have hard-shelled eggs, monotremes lay leathery ones, like a reptilian handbag full of potential. The mother then curls around the eggs in a makeshift pouch or burrow, keeping them warm with her own body heat. Cute in theory. In execution? Disturbing. It's like if a lizard tried to raise kids with mammal instincts but none of the actual equipment. Monotrematum didn't stop there. Like its modern cousin, the platypus, it probably had electroreceptors in its snout to detect prey underwater, and possibly venomous spurs on its legs. So in addition to the bizarre reproductive strategy, it was also a venomous, egg-laying, milk-sweating Frankenstein. And if you're wondering, wait, how does this even work from an evolutionary perspective? That's exactly what paleontologists have been trying to figure out. Monotremes are evolutionary holdouts, a strange blend of mammalian features layered over a reptilian skeleton. They represent a line of mammals that split off early, before the invention of live birth became standard among their relatives. Which means Monotrematum was just doing its thing in evolutionary isolation. like an off-brand experiment nobody thought would work, but somehow still existed for millions of years. To make things even better, or worse, imagine being one of its young. You hatch out of a gooey, leathery egg into a dirt burrow, blind and helpless, and your first meal is milk seeping through your mother's sweat glands. There's no nipple to latch onto, no teat to guide you, just damp fur and survival instincts. If this sounds like something out of a low-budget sci-fi reboot, that's because it might as well be. But the real kicker? This strategy worked. Monotremes still exist today, namely the platypus and echidnas, meaning this reproductive fever dream wasn't just viable, it was successful. Monotrematum was part of a lineage that dodged extinction while everyone else was figuring out how to do live birth or evolve proper nipples. It's a reproductive outlier that didn't just survive, it thrived. In a world full of predators, shifting continents, and mass extinctions, Monotrematum and its kin kept doing their weird little routine. Lay some soft eggs, sweat out some milk, and don't worry too much about what the placental mammals think. And that's why it earns the title. Not because it was the most dangerous or even the most grotesque, but because it redefined what it means to be disturbing. Quietly, efficiently, and with milk glands that never bothered evolving proper plumbing. If Monotrematum is the undisputed champion of reproductive discomfort, then Rhabdopleura is the strange little runner-up lurking in the Paleozoic shadows. It's tiny, colonial, and looks more like plumbing than an animal. But what it lacks in charisma, it makes up for in biological nightmare fuel. Technically speaking, Rhabdopleura is a living genus, but it's part of the larger Graptolite lineage, most of which are long extinct. Graptolites were around from the Cambrian to the Carboniferous, and their fossils look like pencil scribbles in shale. But those innocent-looking lines? They're the remnants of an ancient ocean-drifting superhive with a reproduction system that sounds like it came from a dystopian insect overlord's playbook. Imagine a colony of tiny zooids, each a soft-bodied creature living in a shared tubular structure called a tubarium. These zooids weren't independent animals. They were more like organs of a single colonial body. Some focused on feeding, others on reproduction, and some just existed to keep the plumbing running. Division of labor, Paleozoic style. Now, how did this colony reproduce? Oh, just by growing new zooids out of existing ones? Like budding yeast cells? Or worse, like internal parasitic clones? And if that wasn't weird enough, reproductive zooids may have sacrificed themselves in the process, essentially birthing new colony members by giving up their own internal mass. It's reproduction by body donation. This method meant the colony could keep expanding without doing anything that looked remotely like traditional mating. No gametes, no partners, just one zooid quietly transforming into another, like some kind of grotesque biological factory reset. 1 minute you're feeding, the next you're the raw material for someone else's baby factory. Not exactly a family-friendly setup. There's also evidence that certain zooids were specialized for sexual reproduction, meaning that while the rest of the colony just budded and bloomed, these individuals were tasked with producing larvae that could drift off and start new colonies. Basically, the Rhabdopleura life cycle was a mix of budding, self-recycling, and occasional larval launch pads. It was like if coral, ants, and robots had a baby, then that baby ate itself and grew another colony. Fossils of ancient graptolites show this strategy worked remarkably well. These things were incredibly successful for over 200 million years. Their colonies spread across the oceans, anchored to the seafloor or floating freely, thriving in ecosystems that were still figuring out what a fish even was. And yes, This was happening while more conventional creatures were struggling to evolve jaws. While trilobites were bumbling around with basic external fertilization, Rhabdopleura was already perfecting an internal production line that blurred the line between organism and organ. Reproduction wasn't just disturbing, it was industrialized. What makes it all the more unsettling is that a version of this horror still exists. Rhabdopleura is alive today, hanging out on the seafloor in some parts of the world, still running its biological assembly line. It's not extinct, it just stayed low-key enough to survive. So while Monotrematum wins for sheer weirdness in a large, warm-blooded package, Rhabdopleura deserves a grim little golf clap for showing that you don't need to be big, scary, or even noticeable to reproduce in a way that makes people deeply uncomfortable. It's microscopic. It's ancient. It sacrifices its own organs to make babies. And it's still out there, just quietly budding in the darkness. Now you might be thinking, how did any of this happen? Egg-laying mammals with milk-oozing skin, colonial worms reproducing by body sacrifice? Did nature just give up? Not quite. As disturbing as these strategies look through human eyes, evolution doesn't care about what makes sense to us. It only cares about what works. Let's start with Monotrematum and its fellow monotremes. Laying eggs seems primitive, sure, but it actually gave early mammals a serious survival edge. Eggs can be hidden, abandoned, and incubated without a lot of parental investment, which is great when everything around you is trying to eat your face. The milk part? Even weirder, but a huge evolutionary win. Feeding hatchlings without having to hunt or forage meant babies could grow safely, snuggled in burrows. No nipples? No problem. As long as the milk made it to the mouth, evolution gave it a thumbs up. And in case you're wondering why the sweat gland milk method wasn't replaced, turns out monotremes never needed to evolve something more complex. They carved out an ecological niche, stuck to it, and never bothered upgrading. They were like the old flip phone of the mammalian world. Outdated, maybe, but still making calls just fine. Then there's Rhabdopleura and the Graptolite crew. Colonial reproduction might seem alien, but it's all about efficiency. Instead of wasting energy producing tons of individual animals with full sets of organs, they just specialized. Need a feeder? Grow one. Need a larva launcher? Spawn a reproductive unit? Need a sacrificial blob to recycle into new zooids? Well, gross but effective. This division of labor let graptolites expand quickly, dominate marine environments, and survive conditions that wiped out more normal creatures. In environments where resources are patchy or space is limited, colonies that can grow themselves on the fly have a massive advantage. Creepy? Yes. But evolution is just math wearing a meat suit. Even weirder reproductive strategies like live birth in marine reptiles or backbrooding frogs all came down to the same principle: survival through adaptation. Live birth, for instance, shows up again and again in evolution, not because it's always better, but because in some environments it is. If you're giving birth in water full of predators, skipping the vulnerable egg stage and popping out a miniature swimmer ready to bolt makes a lot of sense. Even if that swimmer was curled inside your body like a reptilian nesting doll. Backbrooding amphibians? It's the same story. Eggs laid out in the open get eaten. Eggs hidden in the skin of your back? Weird, but way safer. Some ancient frogs even went full monster mode, developing internal sacs that hatched live young through their mouths. Mouth birth. Yep, that's a thing. The real takeaway here is that evolution doesn't plan. It doesn't design. It just tinkers. Every bizarre reproductive strategy was the result of some ancient creature stumbling into a solution that gave it just enough edge to survive, reproduce, and pass on that freak show to the next generation. And if that meant sweating milk or turning your body into a larva factory, Evolution shrugged and said, "If it works, it works." There's no moral here, no guiding hand shaping things toward perfection, just billions of years of rolling the dice and keeping whatever doesn't immediately implode, which is why so many of these disturbing methods didn't just evolve once. They kept popping up across different species, different periods, and different branches of the tree of life. If you think all this prehistoric reproductive madness got left in the fossil record where it belongs, sorry. It didn't. The freak parade just kept marching, right into the modern age. Disturbing reproduction isn't just a relic of the past. It's alive, squirming, and occasionally birthing out of places no one asked about. Let's start with the seahorse. Cute little fish, right? Floaty, gentle, vaguely magical, sure. Except the males get pregnant. That's not a metaphor. They literally grow a brood pouch where the female deposits her eggs, and then the male fertilizes and incubates them. A few weeks later, he goes into full labor and ejects dozens to hundreds of tiny seahorses in a writhing cloud of aquatic chaos. He contracts, he pants, he shoots babies like a living party cannon. It's equal parts beautiful and baffling. Then there's the caecilian, a worm-like amphibian that already looks like a rejected horror movie prop. Some species have a very special maternal behavior. The babies eat their mother's skin. Not metaphorically, literally. She grows a fatty, nutrient-rich layer of skin just for them to peel off and devour. It's called dermatophagy. And yes, it's considered normal, because what better way to bond with your young than letting them exfoliate you to death? But wait, there's more. The echidna, monotrem cousin of Monotrematum, not only lays leathery eggs and feeds its young with milk from skin pores, but the males come equipped with a 4-headed penis. 4 heads. Only 2 function at a time, and scientists still aren't entirely sure why. It's like evolutionary roulette. Spin the wheel, pick a head, and hope for successful fertilization. All of these creatures are alive today, which means the legacy of prehistoric reproductive insanity didn't die off. It just evolved into new forms. The methods changed, the players are different, but the vibe? Unmistakably cursed. And here's the kicker. Humans are the weird ones, evolutionarily speaking. Internal fertilization, placentas, live birth, mammary glands, it's all relatively recent in the grand timeline. Most creatures past and present don't do reproduction our way. They do it the way evolution told them to, which is to say, whatever keeps the species going, no matter how uncomfortable it makes everyone else. So the next time you see a platypus laying an egg or a seahorse dad popping out 100 kids, remember. This isn't some quirky deviation. This is the biological norm served with a side of nightmare fuel. Evolution doesn't judge, it just gets results. And those results? Still disturbingly efficient. After all that, it's pretty clear. Prehistoric reproduction wasn't just bizarre, it was full-blown science fiction. We're talking about creatures that hatched out of skin, nursed from sweat glands, cloned themselves with internal zooid factories, and gave live birth in oceans before fish even figured out lungs. Nature was throwing every idea at the wall to see what stuck. And somehow a lot of it did stick. If an alien biologist came down and asked to see Earth's reproductive strategies, and you handed them a monotreme, a caecilian, and a fossil of a brooding shrimp with 30 eggs in its head cave, they'd assume Earth was a biology-themed horror planet. And honestly, not far off. But here's the thing. Every one of these disturbing strategies was a response to real problems. How do you keep your eggs from being eaten? How do you raise helpless offspring in an unstable environment? How do you spread your genes when there's no mate in sight? These creatures weren't trying to be weird. They were just trying to survive, using whatever tools evolution handed them, even if that meant sacrificing their own flesh or sweating out breakfast for their kids. What's maybe most impressive is how these strategies weren't flukes. They evolved again and again in different forms across wildly unrelated species. Evolution didn't just try disturbing reproduction once and move on. It leaned in. And while we might recoil at the idea of mouth-birthing frogs or four-headed platypus penises, the reality is, it worked. These strategies kept species alive through ice ages, mass extinctions, shifting continents, and ocean anoxia events. Meanwhile, most of the so-called normal creatures from back then, fossilized, extinct, gone. The lesson? There's no one right way to make more life. Whether you're a colonial worm bursting out of your own kind or a mammal squirting milk through your armpits, the only thing that matters is the next generation. So next time someone tells you evolution is elegant, remind them. It's also deeply unsettling, surprisingly moist, and still going strong.